Today we are very happy to host Professor Srinivas Reddy, who's been with IIT Gandhinagar for many years and also teaches occasionally at Brown University. He's a great scholar in classical Sanskrit, Telugu, Tamil, classical Indian music and literature and more. And this makes him quite competent to speak on the theme of Indian music, and especially what happened at the level of India and how it is that we can speak of Indian music as something recognizable despite all the regional differences that we know. With this brief introduction, I would like to invite Srinivas Reddy to give his first talk today, and there will be another to complete tomorrow, and all details, including his abstracts and biodata, can be found on our website, iks.itgn.ac.in. So, Srinivas, please take over.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can everyone hear? Okay. Yep. All right. So first, I have to thank my dear friend, Professor Danino. Michelle Danino is just a wonderful scholar, human being, and friend. We spent many days together chatting about many things, and I learned a lot from Michelle. So I thank him for that, and the wonderful team that he's put together for the Indian knowledge systems, which he's doing for what I think a number of years. And also I see Professor Jain has joined. So namaste, sir. Wonderful to be back at IIT, which is like a home to me, and a lot of old friends and good memories. So thank you very much. I've been doing this pretty regularly now. I know it takes a little time, but it's always good. We'll have 2-minute Shanti. So I'll hit the bell, and for 2 minutes, we can just sit in silence and collect our thoughts. And this is also important too, because when we talk about music, the flip side of music, of sound, is silence, maunyam. And as my guru used to say, maunyam sarvartha sadhanam. All things are achieved through silence. So let us have 2-minute Shanti first. Thank you. Okay, I will try now to share the screen or to present. Okay, so here we are, Indian knowledge systems, the Indian web of arts and aesthetics. This is part one of 2 parts, and both parts deal with this basic fundamental idea of classical and folk and how they interact, because the interaction is actually the key part. And again, I'll discuss all of these terms in more detail. And just to start, this first picture, this first image, I like this image because, well, it's actually quite a late, I think it's maybe 17th century or maybe even 18th century. I can get the details, but this is a depiction of what we would call the yogic body. And the reason I like this image is because it represents and depicts something very fundamental to the Indian conceptualization of not only music or the world or the body, but everything, in the sense that it is a representation of this idea of the macrocosmic world, the universe, the outside world, and the inside world, the microcosm of the body, all being inherently interconnected. So all of the world is contained within the body. The body also extends not this deha or this sharira, but everywhere into a kind of a universal self or body. And so this depiction I like because, again, sometimes we see images of, you know, Indian gods or goddesses with all the world, but everybody, literally every body, every deha, every sharira has this world in it. And what I find so fascinating even these days is all of these things have parallels with what's happening in modern science. Like the big thing the last few years has been this gut biome, right? So you hear about you know, how we have so many microorganisms inside of our system. And it's true, there's millions of these little guys running around. So there's worlds of life even inside our body. So these ideas that we sometimes think are ancient and a little bit, you know, fantastical in their own way are not very far-fetched at all. And that kind of harmonizing of you know, what we would call maybe a modern Western scientific approach, there's a lot of synergy between some of the ideas that were expressed maybe in a different way, but synergy nonetheless in some of these concepts. So I just wanted to start by saying that, because if there's anything that I want to stress in these lectures or in any lectures that I've given, is this idea of not a bifurcation of knowledge as in East and West, but, you know, a shared kind of understanding of what the world can give. And India provides, particularly ancient India, provides a perspective that unfortunately we don't get to look at as much. So that's why this entire program and course is so fundamental, because it's really bringing us back to some of the ancient ideas that are just as relevant now, and maybe even more relevant for what we need in the present moment. So there it is. Let me start. Okay, so did this go to the next slide? Yes? Sorry, I need someone to respond, so just so I know. Yes? Okay. I can't see you, Michelle, so if you just... when I'm on the video, sorry. I can't... Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to play this now, and you tell me if it works.
Yes.
Okay. Let's listen to this for just a minute or so.
Brahmani manasa sancharare, 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 Brahmani manasa sancharare,
Okay, so I won't go further, but I really, in tomorrow's lecture, I'll play more music, but even today, you can't have a lecture without playing a little bit of music. So I just wanted to show this one particular song. This is a classical Carnatic kriti, and I won't get into the details of the lyrics. Maybe that'll be for another lecture. But, you know, well, if you go and read the lyrics, you will understand what's going on. Just to stress a little bit on this point, that when we think of classical, you know, there's just an image of kind of a seriousness, and you know, everything's very formal, and the lyrics are very adhyatmika. But even adhyatmika is always matched, particularly in music, with Shringara. These two things are not mutually exclusive. I mean, if that's the key point. This mutual exclusivity is not part of the Indian system, or the drishti of the Indian way. That all of these things are melding together. So you can use, you know, romantic kind of language, but it doesn't have to be a romance of, you know, let's say, you know, human love, but a romance of the spirit, of a spiritual type. And those are the kinds of feelings that are being expressed here. The reason I just chose this piece is because I never knew about this song growing up as a kid as a classical piece. I just thought it was a nice song because this song became very famous because it was used in a movie that came out. And so again, I'm just stressing how classical and, you know, folk, or classical and modern, or classical and you know, movie type common, you know, modern music also interact very closely. So this is a scene from the movie Śārṅgadeva, which uses the same songs. Beautiful scene where a boy is massaging his guru's feet, and then he forgets the lyric, and then the guru just speaks out the next line in his sleep. Means that the song is kind of inside of him even when he's sleeping. So it's quite nice.
ब्रह्मणि मानस संचररे मदसिखि पिञ्छालङ्कृत चिकुरे मदसिखि पिञ्छालङ्कृत चिकुरे महनीय कपोलजित मुकुरे मानस संचररे. श्रीरमणी कुच श्रीरमणी
श्रीरमणी कुच दुर्ग विहारी सेवक जन मंदिर मंदारे
परमहंस मुख चंद्र चकोरे परिपूरित मुरलीरवधारे मानस संचररे.
It's a beautiful song. I just wanted to start the talk with a little bit of music. And again, just to stress this point that classical, popular music, folk music, all of these are kind of distinctions that, you know, maybe scholars develop, or even, you know, people use in common language. But there's a lot of interaction between those two. And that's really the whole point, is that everything is constantly moving from one way side to the other. I forget, you know, I was trying to find the quote, but somebody said, you know, folk music is just classical music is just folk music that's kind of been elevated, or something like that. It kind of reminds me of the quote that A.K. Ramanujan often uses in terms of language. Again, same thing, that, you know, language is just a dialect with an army. You know, so it's really more of a contextualization of issues related to power and identity that make these distinctions or these categorical kind of demarcations more evident. But music itself, or language itself, or art itself, or whatever it may be, is what it is. And so we have to try to approach it from its most fundamental level. At the same time, scholars do a lot of work, and that's what we're going to talk about today. More I will discuss in this lecture is the theoretical side of things, and the large apparatus developed in India on this side of things, on the theoretical side of things, particularly in this case, of course, the Saṅgīta-śāstra. So let me move on. So here we go. Let's first, before I talk about the image on the left, the text, let me just begin by talking about a few important terms and what they mean. So first of all, Saṅgīta, the word that we generally use for music, is actually much more than that. Saṅgīta, well, I mean, Gita, you could say means song, but Saṅgīta, san is always the prefix that means, you know, wholeness or perfection or completion. So like a composite sense of what song is what music is in general. And particularly in the, you know, Nāṭyaśāstra, and I'll talk about that in a second. Saṅgīta is the combination of three different things. Saṅgīta is the combination of Gita, that is like a vocal composition or some kind of song with lyric. You have Vadya, that's like instruments like sitar and drums and all of these things. And then you have Nritta or Natya, you know, some kind of dance. Again, the body coming into play. So all of these three things coming together, vocal, instrumental, and dance, that is what Saṅgīta means. Saṅgīta just doesn't mean just music. So Saṅgīta, in a sense, is like composite art, is really what they're positing. And if you read the old texts, they talk about all of these things. They talk about vocal music, they talk about instruments, they talk about stringed instruments, they talk about rhythmic instruments, and of course they have long section on dance. And all of this is also related to theater. So again, all of it is kind of like this large spectrum of understanding how, you know, the Indian arts as a whole were conceived. So that's the first most important thing to understand, that Saṅgīta is not just music. Saṅgīta involves something more than that, and it involves a context that's important to take into consideration. And also, when the scholars, that's when the, you know, writers of the Shastras write about these things. So when we talk about Saṅgīta-śāstra, the Saṅgīta-śāstras are not just about, you know, ragas or talas. They're about all of these other things also. And there's quite a bit of information on all of that in all of the Saṅgīta-śāstra texts, some more than others, but for the most part, particularly the first one, the Nāṭyaśāstra, as it says, it's not even a Saṅgīta-śāstra, it's a Nāṭyaśāstra. And within that Nāṭyaśāstra, you get Saṅgīta. So anyway, this is just something to keep in mind. And again, these things evolve over time, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. So to get back to a couple of other important terms, Shastra. Shastra is an incredibly important word to understand. Shastra, well, in the Indian literary sense, Shastra is always, you know, put in contrast to, let us say, Kavya. So Kavya is like what we would call like literature, you know, like poetry and, you know, like kind of imagination and creative kind of writing. Shastra is today what they generally call like scientific writing. And it's true. It's academic. That's what it's scholastic writing. That's what a Shastra is. So you have, you know, like Saṅgīta-śāstra, you have Nāṭyaśāstra, you have whatever, all different kinds of Shastras for all sorts of different kinds of disciplines. So that's what a Shastra is. It's like scientific writing. And what a Shastra generally does is talk about lakshya. Now, lakshya means the thing that you want to be seen, the thing that is supposed to be like normative, the thing like is as it ought to be. Okay? Now, I'm setting these ideas up to further complicate them later on. But basically, a Shastra comes and says, okay, this is what a singer is, and this is what they do, and these are the 10 things they need to do, and this is the 10 things they shouldn't do, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Lakshya is kind of telling you what ought to be. In contrast to Shastra and Lakshya, you have the idea of Prayoga and Lakshana. So Prayoga means, as you guys know, it's how things are practiced. It's the real life of the thing. It's the usage of the thing. It is the thing in action. So you can have, Shastra on one side that says do the X, Y, and Z, but then you have Prayoga, which is actually what people do. And that's what Lakshana means. Lakshana means that which is actually, seen. What do you actually see in practice? So fundamentally, what we're talking about is Shastra, Lakshya is theory, you could say, and Prayoga, Lakshana is practice. So this theory practice, bifurcation is what, we're talking about. Of course, the whole point is that these are going to interact, but just at the beginning, we need to kind of set that up. So on the left here, you just have, this is the first line of the Saṅgīta-Ratnākara, probably one of the most musical texts written after the Nāṭyaśāstra. This is the most important text, and I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in 1 second. So let's see. Okay. Now, any Indian musician, in fact, this is not even true of music, it's true of anything, because if you want to talk about Indian knowledge system, I tell you, Indian knowledge, that's why, again, I started with that image of that body. Indian knowledge is embodied knowledge. There's no knowledge that exists outside of like a body. That's why the most important thing, no matter what Shastra you're learning, is who's your guru? Which human being did you sit with to learn this? Because knowledge is not in the book. Knowledge, I mean, like I'm saying, we have all this Shastra, that's fine. And those are important. But that Shastra has to be transmitted through that human being's, experience of it. And that's really what knowledge is in India. It's a human contact. That's why your guru, your teacher, is so important in Indian everything, particularly in Indian music. I mean, the first thing anyone in Indian musical artists, the first thing you say, oh, I learned sitar, oh, I learned tabla, okay, now who's your guru? First thing is, who's your guru? Because saying who your guru is, that shows everything, that shows your lineage, your, gharana, and I'll talk about these things later. But what I wanted to bring in here is that the scholarly tradition also has this idea of, a lineage or a parampara. This is parampara, very important word. Para, going one after the other, right? So parampara, like Guru Shishya Parampara, we say. So the Guru and the Shishya in a line. This is it's something, that's why lineage, same thing. So this parampara is important. Now, what I wanted to talk about, today I decided to call Grantha Parampara. So there's a textual lineage also. And this is important to understand. This is important to understand, again, in relation to all Indian knowledge systems, in the sense that nobody comes along and says, I invented something new. Even though they kind of do say that, but they'll never say that really. They'll say, oh, from the great Bharata Muni, I got this idea, and I'm just adding a little bit to it. So there's always this respect of the tradition. And this is a really, really, I can't stress this one enough. This, to me, is another really fundamental aspect of Indian knowledge, is that nobody takes the old stuff and just completely disregards it. Nobody just washes it away and says, this is completely wrong and useless and old. No. You always give respect to that thing. And at the same time, of course, you want to update things. And I'll show you some very clear examples of that in a second. The other thing that's important to remember about this is that my guru used to always tell me, it is best to read the oldest text with the newest commentary. Because what that does is, because that old text is still relevant and important, but the commentaries show that kind of layering of analysis that goes on. So what you do is you read the oldest text, but you read the most recent commentary that was written on it. Because that commentator is going to talk about this commentator, and that commentator talk about this one. So there's, like, again, that lineage is what you're getting. Oldest text, most recent commentator. So oftentimes we think of kind of knowledge coming down, you know, like here I'm showing Bharata Muni is the kind of, you know, we say is the beginning of all of this Nāṭyaśāstra and saṅgīta-śāstra. And there's a descent of the text. But at the same time, these texts also are always going back up and always referencing back. So there's this, again, interplay of how these things work together. So here's a little list of some of the important kind of musical texts that we have. Of course, the first and foremost, the kind of beginning, you could say, of all of this Saṅgīta-śāstra, Nāṭyaśāstra, all of this arts in general, is attributed to Bharata Muni. And then, of course, he got all this information from Shiva and Brahma, and, you know, so there's that kind of descent of knowledge from, you know, a celestial kind of source. And then Bharata Muni has all these shishyas, and then these shishyas go out and send the knowledge into the world. One of the shishyas is supposed to be this Dattila. And this Dattila also, he wrote a text they called Dattilam. We don't have that much about it. The next text we have is Mātaṅga. And here, now this is important. Why particularly I wanted to mention this one is because his text is called the Bṛhaddeśi. And this is the text that really gets into this whole Deshi Marga thing, which I'll come to in 1 second. But what I also wanted to point out is, you know, so we have, it's very hard to date Indian texts, as you well know, but we can get relative chronologies. So we know that Dattilam came after Bharata. We know that Bṛhaddeśi came after Dattilam, like that. So those guys, you know, let's say, you know, maybe in the BC, maybe, I don't know, it's not, probably not, but, you know, evolving over time. It's not like also these texts just came into existence. They evolve over time. So, but, you know, up until, like, you know, let's say around 700-ish, you have these three figures, and they're all known as munis. Now, munis, you know, again, they're hard to pin down historically, but, you know, the whole word muni itself goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Muni is the one who is a silent one. So it's interesting. The munis are the ones that are giving us the text, but they're the quiet ones. Muni maunya, that's the same root. So but the point is that the munis they were like spiritual, you know, practitioners. That's the main thing. Then you come, so then there's a lot of, you know, things that happen in the middle. It's like hard again to track, but the kind of landmark text in Saṅgīta-śāstra is Śārṅgadeva's Saṅgītaratnākara, and this was written, you know, 1220, you know, 13th century, let's say, at the court of in Maharashtra, at the Yadava court, Devgiri. So, and we know this because Śārṅgadeva talks about this, and this is important. He mentions how his family they're Kashmiri Brahmins that had settled back in Maharashtra, and the important thing, again, linking it back to that first image that I showed, and some of the research that, you know, hopefully I'll be able to share at some point. The Śārṅgadeva and his family, they were also well-known Vaidyas. Means that their main profession actually was to be physicians. He was also an accountant, actually, in this court. So he had many talents, multi-talented person, a polymath, as we say. So Śārṅgadeva, if you read his Saṅgītaratnākara, the whole first section of the Saṅgītaratnākara, the whole like first chapter, has nothing to do with music. All he's talking about in that first chapter is that image that I was showing, this yogic body, the different chakras, how the prana moves through the, you know, sushumna and the nadis and all of this stuff. So there's a whole section on basically, you know, the yogic body and Ayurveda that prefaces all of his discussion of Saṅgīta. So again, this idea that, these disciplines are, oh, Saṅgītaratnākara is a music text. No, well, yeah, it is. But music doesn't mean just music. Music means a lot of other things. And to understand music properly, you have to have an understanding of the body. Like that, these texts really show a lot. So anyway, what makes, from a musical perspective though, what makes Śārṅgadeva important is it's the main text that kind of takes into account everything from the Nāṭyaśāstra down and kind of re-assimilates it all and puts it into a nice format, and kind of updates things. And I'll talk specifically about that in 1 second. The other text that I just wanted to mention is, well, we're going to get into it in detail, is this Svaramelakalānidhi, written by Rāmāmātya. And Amatya, he was also a minister. See, these guys are all multi-talented guys. He was a minister. We don't even think that was his name. He was Rama's minister. Means he was this Rāmārāya, he was the son-in-law of Krishnadeva Raya. He was an emperor of Vijayanagara, and he was the one that was ruling when Vijayanagara came to an end. But before that, the court was doing quite well, and there's a scene that's described in the text where Rāmārāya and his brother are sitting there, and the brother says, we really need to know more about this Saṅgīta. And then he says, oh yes, let me ask my minister Rāmāmātya, who knows all about music, to write a text. And so he writes this text in 1550. And what's interesting is and this is the text I've worked on in detail, which is why I wanted to share it, and I retranslated it. But there are sections of Rāmāmātya that are identical to, straight taken directly from Saṅgītaratnākara. Now, I know we talk about plagiarism and all that a lot these days, but in the Indian sense, this was not plagiarism. This was, in a way, a type of respect. And he does mention his author, so he does give a citation. So there it is. It's not like he just took it and said it was his. So this idea of, paying respect to what came before and then reformulating things is really the key point about, this Indian way of expressing knowledge. Okay, so before we go into some textual excerpts, I just wanted to talk about, again, and I'll get more into this idea of what interplay of classical and folk means. So if you read the Shastras, what we call classical today, at one point was known as Gandharva. Gandharva in the sense that it was produced by the Gandharvas. And the Gandharvas are, these celestial musicians. They live in like the antariksha. They live in the space between heaven and earth, and they float around, and they have these beautiful instruments and beautiful songs, and they represent a type of I don't want to say divine exactly, but it's a type of, celestial is the right word, a type of kind of celestial music. It's not laukika. It's not happening on earth. There's something else about it. And later on, this kind of gets later recategorized as what we would call mārga. Now, mārga here means, of course, the way. And the point that they want to show is this is the moksha mārga, particularly. This is the path of salvation. This is the path of, developing, a spiritual practice. And, it's no joke. It's no kind of empty thing to say that Indian music is spiritual practice, and it is. At its core, that is what it is. At the same time, that doesn't mean that it's not pleasurable and fun and enjoyable and all those things. But again, for the convenience of the kind of like Shastras, again, they kind of make these distinctions. So what we consider or call folk today, like Janapadas, Janapada Gita, they call, like music of the people. This was known as Gana. So things that are sung by people. And then this Gana terminology came down, particularly in the text like Bṛhaddeśi, which means the great Deśi, the great, or really it should be great desis, because it's all different regions. The Bṛhaddeśi, or Deśi as it's known, is related to the land, is related to locality, is located to a space and the idiosyncrasies of a place. So what's interesting, and if you go back to the other lectures that I'd given about like bhakti and other things, it's the same stuff. You have, and when we talk about literature, it's the same stuff. Sanskrit is kind of the mārga. Sanskrit is the one, it's pan-Indic, everybody knows it, it's the same everywhere. It has this kind of elevated status. And then you have Deśi languages, or what we call the vernacular languages. They're also good, but they're all regionalized. They have their own specific places where they're spoken, and they're different like that. And then, of course, later on, the Deśi languages also kind of get classicalized. So you have that, interaction between these two. They get margified, or whatever you want to call it. So what I'm trying to say is that classical, Gandharva, Mārga, is kind of on one side. Folk, Gana, Deśi is on the other side. And yet these sides are really, two sides of the same thing. And they're always interacting with each other. So now for the remainder of the time, I'll just read out some quotations from this translation of the Svaramelakalānidhi. So again, looking at kind of like the latest text to really get some idea of what the earliest text was saying. I mean, in a sense, you could think of the Svaramelakalānidhi as a commentary, in a sense, on the Nāṭyaśāstra. So that's how I'm kind of conceiving these things. So first, his definition of music, and this is important, is it's a pleasing arrangement of swaras. So there has to be something pleasing about it. I think the word in the Sanskrit is ranjika. So there has to be something that's giving delight. And that is really important, no matter what kind of, classical or folk or whatever. It has to give some feeling to the listener, some kind of positive feeling, you could say. Okay, and then he goes on to explain that music, this music that we're talking about, is divided into two categories. We have Gandharva and Gana. Gandharva is a fixed tradition with no beginning, anadi. So that's the whole thing. That's why it comes from like, the celestial realms. There's no beginning. There's no founder. It's just like there. I mean, and it's practiced by Gandharvas as a source of spiritual development. And this is why I'm saying moksha marga. There's a pathway. There's like, a system here that they're developing, and their goal is some kind of spiritual development. He contrasts this with Gana, and he says Gana is music that pleases people, composed in accordance with theories. Vāgyekaras, these are, like basically composers, and actually Vāgyekaras usually were like the itinerant musicians. These were the musicians that would go around. I mean, even the Gandharvas used to fly around. Same way, the musicians are kind of, very nomadic people, you could say. So these Vāgyekaras, they would go around, but they were also composers. That's the main thing. And they composed in accordance with some of these theories that we'll see that have developed. And they did this in what? In Deśi ragas, means regional kind of melodies, and other forms, he says, and he doesn't get into the details about that. So this is what he's saying so far. Let me go on. And here, the reason I'm highlighting this section of the text is to really show what these guys were trying to do, and how this modality of not getting rid of anything plays out. There's always a respect for the ancient thing, but yet there's a desire to kind of update things. And what you're going to see here is all about a harmonization of that lakshya and lakshana. It's one thing that the musical texts say this, but when I actually go and hear the music, it's like this. So, or they say Rag Shankara Bharanam is XYZ, but when I go and hear Rag Shankara Bharanam, I hear XYA. So what's going on here? Let's kind of make this work out together. So that's what's happening. So he says, Gandharva music is practiced with an adherence to theory. But if there is no contradiction when a theory is dispensed with, then practice is paramount to theory. Now, this is interesting. In a sense, he's trying to negotiate this idea of basically saying practice is more important, but he still doesn't want to throw away the theory. So why I like to highlight these points is it shows the kind of, I don't want to even say it's a tension, but it's a desire for these guys to basically say the theory needs to be updated and it's not exactly right, but we don't want to throw it all away. So it's a very interesting position that these Shastric authors are always dealing with. So in Ghana music, practice ought to be more important than theory. So here he says when it comes to like Laukika music, definitely practice gets place of importance. But this practice should be abandoned if it doesn't create something pleasant. And that goes back to the original definition of music, that it should be pleasing. So in this world, Ghana music progresses in accordance with practice. So this idea that, you know, again, mārga is something that doesn't really evolve. It's kind of like a fixed way. The path is there. Whereas Deśi has this component of evolution in it. It has a feeling of like change. It has a feeling of change in place, change in time, etc., etc. Now he says here, Sarangasuri, now this is Rāmāmātya. Again, here's what I mean about the referencing. So this is Indian citation right here. So even though he was, and I can get into the details about the verses that he's using from Saṅgīta, but here he's giving clear reference to his predecessor. So Sarangasuri, who is versed in matters contained in all the musical shastras considered in this chapter on instruments, the primacy of practice in Ghana music, or rather that the shastras themselves value the importance of practice. Therefore, a shastra that contradicts practice should not be followed. Oh, again, I had to put that in parentheses because he doesn't come out and quite say it exactly, although when you read the text, that's what he's saying. He's giving primacy to practice, and this is really important. Okay, so let me continue. While the laws of graha, amsha, nyasa, these are all musical things, and the arrangements of the other swaras are the domain of the shastras, they do not contradict the basis of practice. Okay? So although you have all these theories, right, they're not going to like go against practice. But wherever there are inconsistencies now between theory and practice, the theory should be abandoned. And here, you know, he's making now he's taking it a little further. He is saying that certain theories now need to be taken out. And again, he references Śārṅgadeva. Like Śārṅgadeva Suri, who resolved that this in the Deśi ragas, theory ought to conform with what is practiced in Ghana music. Okay, so that's just extending the same thing. Here's the point. Establishing the primacy of practice substantiates theory. So all this music should be understood as two categories. So all of this discourse was about this whole two category thing. But at the end of the day, and this is a beautiful line that he's come up with, what he's saying is, no matter how much we need to update the theory, at the end of the day, practice is really what like upholds theory. And so what he's really positing, and it's really quite fascinating because, you know, it's like a balancing act. And that's what's so fascinating. He wants to basically harmonize these two, and he's really, this word of substantiation, he's really stressing how the two are inseparably connected to each other. That practice is kind of evolving, and then the theory is a little bit changing, but the theory also defines how people are going to practice. And like that, these things evolve over time. And it's quite fascinating how, you know, when you get past this stage, a whole set of music texts develop. Of course, this is also around the period when you have a major bifurcation into Hindustani music and Carnatic music, and they go in quite different directions, particularly in their theoretical formulations. But anyway, it's at this stage, there's still like one unified kind of tradition. I think this might be the last slide. Yeah. So it's 5:20 now, and why don't I stop there and we can pick this up next time. I'll stop the screen share. I've talked for quite a bit of time. I hope that was comprehensible.